So hello everyone and welcome to episode 2 of the EPQ Summer Podcast Series. This podcast is made in conjunction with the University of Leeds and the University of Southampton. My name is Sarah and I'm joined today by my colleague Matt and Mark from Garforth Academy. Before we dive straight into talking about the EPQ, I'm just going to give everyone that's here today the opportunity to introduce themselves. So as I've said, I'm Sarah and I'm a Senior Education Outreach Officer at the University of Leeds. My job is to develop the resources for the taught skills element of the EPQ and help support schools through their EPQ journey. I'll let my colleague Matt introduce himself next.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm Matt. I do the exact same job as Sarah. So our job is specialising in providing support to practitioners across the country doing the EPQ and also to students that are taking the EPQ qualification. Today's session is targeting, we're looking at work around new practitioners and providing advice and guidance on how to support students with their EPQ. We're joined today by Mark, who's going to introduce himself now and talk a little bit about the context of his school and provide a bit of an overview before we go into the questions for today's podcast.
Thanks, Matt. So I'm Mark Newstead. I am a teacher at Garforth Academy in Leeds, which is a large secondary school, obviously an academy. Around about 1,900 students at the school. Around about 450 of those are sixth form students. It's a standard secondary with the challenges that I think most of us all face. We've got good outcomes generally. Yeah, that's me.
Fab, Mark. Thank you so much. So I think, seeing as you're here today to give us some insight on what the EPQ is like in your school, we'll just start with some really easy questions. So how did you get involved with the EPQ and how long have you been delivering it?
So EPQ was up and running when I started teaching EPQ. I was actually the head of sixth form and it sort of naturally fell to me to help the delivery really. So it was reasonably established. There was a school coordinator. And initially, I just started teaching it literally an hour a week with one group of students. Next year, so it's sort of progressed from there, where I've kind of become the coordinator. And actually, next year I'll be delivering all the EPQ. We will have two groups of around 25 students each, so 50 in total in year 12, and I'll be delivering that and really coordinating it and looking after it.
Thanks for that, Mark. So I'm just wondering, in terms of how many members of staff do you have involved and how easy do you find it coordinating the EPQ among the staff at the school as well?
So for us, we've done it through a quite traditional route. So we actually allocate timetable time to the students and the staff. So this year there's myself and a colleague that have actually 2 hours a week. We started doing an hour a week, but each group has 2 hours a week now, which is timetabled. This year as well, there's a sort of separate coordinator. So myself and the other colleague deliver the lessons and look after the groups basically. And the coordinator really, due to their teaching commitments, just sort of oversees it, does a lot of the moderation work at the end, help and advice. Meets students now and again, but has limited input, but just sort of oversees it. We also kind of have informally, obviously dependent on the subjective or the subject content of the EPQ, students naturally go to their subject teachers, but there's no sort of formal arrangement in place that they have to support or anything. It's just a general sort of acceptance at our school that they will help out. So if it's a scientific ones, obviously they're likely to be doing science subjects and their science teachers would kind of help with advice and guidance around the content.
That's really interesting. And so it sounds like your school's got a really good structure for their EPQ programme and quite a nice support network amongst the teachers. Do you use any other support networks? Like, do you use any software or systems to support your EPQ programme? Or do you work with external bodies? Or do you kind of manage everything in-house?
we generally manage everything in-house. We don't use any particular software. Naturally, over the last sort of year or so, well, 18 months, we've kind of started using Teams a lot more. And even though the students are obviously back in school, we've found Teams really helpful in terms of just general sharing of information and collecting, sort of working to give feedback and various things like that. In terms of partners or partnerships, we've obviously got yourselves as the University of Leeds delivering a number of workshops each year, which has worked really well. Over the last, since the lockdown period, that's obviously been virtual, which has been really useful. I actually personally really valued the prior to that, we did sort of visits to the university, and I really valued that, partly for the content, although we're still obviously getting that now, but partly for the fact that the students just got a bit of a feel for university and a feel for university life and the types of things that are the types of environment that they'll be doing there. So we kind of used it also as a bit of like enrichment and just really trying to expose the students to that area to promote that, I suppose, and show them the options.
So just to build on that, Mark, so in terms of, if we kind of look at the students now then, with the EPQ, what I want to ask you is, how do you get that buy-in for students? Is it something that is compulsory for students to do the EPQ, or is it something that students have to come to you about with a proposal, for example? And it kind of to further to that kind of question as well, is there any way that you kind of promote the EPQ and the values of that across your school as well?
Yeah, so I can actually see massive benefits to EPQ for all students, if I'm honest. And if I had the buy-in from all students, I would say it would massively benefit all students. The issue is that unless you've got that buy-in, the students are not going to get out of the qualification what they need. So the way we do it is we certainly promote it. Right from when we're sort of trying to recruit into the sixth form, we talk about EPQ as an addition to the standard study program, and that promotion starts then. We then promote it early on in year 12, but the way we do it is we ask the students to apply to do the course, so we sort of make it a real benefit to them, if that makes sense. We expect that they buy into it completely and they have to complete an application. It's not a massive application, but they have to write a sort of 500 word or up to 500 word almost introduction proposal, which is based on their ideas around it. So we do things like assemblies and various other things. Form tutors promote it, and then they write the application. The ones that obviously don't fill the application form in don't get on the course, and as such we sort of removing the ones that we don't think will have the buy-in if they can't be bothered to do the application. I'm not sure how successful they would be. So we tend to, everybody that applies, we tend to allow onto the course, and ultimately that depends on numbers. But sometimes we'll have 60 students doing it, sometimes we'll have only 40, 45, it just depends, but it's very much an application, and I think that really instantly reduces the sort of dropout rate, because they've got to actually do something to get on the course.
So Mark, once you've got students on the course, when do you kind of start your program, and when do you submit the projects, and do you have any sort of little deadlines in between, or tips that other teachers could use to help keep their students on track with their projects without taking away from that independent nature that is part of the EPQ?
Yeah, so it runs for us in quite a different way, in that we actually start the EPQ after the October half term of year 12. So basically they're back for half a term, and that's when we promote it and get them to sign up for it. But the lessons start sort of the week back after half term and runs for a full 12-month period. So we submit in the November series essentially every year. So the students get the 12 months, in terms of internal deadlines, it is a balance. You want to give them the sort of exposure to time management and looking after their own time management. But as we all know, not all 16, 17, 18-year-olds can do that. So we have a bit of a balance. We aim certainly for the deadline of first draft of everything, so report, log and presentation, to be in just before the summer holidays. So we've then got really the summer holidays to sort of mark them and feedback and do various things, and then we've got kind of up to October half term to make any amendments, changes, improvements that they might want to do. So that's a definite deadline that they're all very much aware of all the way through. The only other real deadlines we have are sort of fairly loose, in that when we do the time management sort of elements of the course and we make all students do an actual project plan where they set their own deadlines, and we just kind of guide them really around where they should be. So when they're doing the mid-project review, we kind of talk about maybe a three-week period that should be done and be aimed to do by, and we kind of just all the way through, we've got a very rough outline of where they should be, and we sort of just check in with them in the lessons. But that's not like a normal subject whereby if they've not handed it in, that's it. We're moaning and groaning about it. It is loose because students do things at different rates and actually choose to, one might set a deadline for themselves where they want to have done 2,500 words of the report by a particular time, but actually they find that they enjoy doing all the research, and as soon as they've done the research, they start writing out up. So they might do it quicker than they actually plan to do. They might have planned to do all the research before the write up and stuff. So it is fluid in terms of deadlines, but there's still that teacher input just to keep a check on them, because if you don't, it's like any of us, I suppose. If you know you've got 9 months to do something, you might not go as fast as you need to in the earlier parts.
Thanks, Mark. I think one of the things, well, just to kind of build on your answer a little bit, I feel like me and Sarah both what we really like about the EPQ is that it teaches students those time management skills about deadlines, very much kind of like we were saying in one of your previous answers about that kind of what university is like, for example. It really is a really good tool to use to get students prepared for university life, because they will have to some extent, deal with a project, complete different types of tasks in order to create that bigger kind of piece as well. So yeah, we definitely see that value of that EPQ as well. One of the things I wanted to ask you was just more about the project itself as well. What do you think makes a good EPQ? And have you got any good examples for new practitioners of kind of what you notice are the fundamentals to making a kind of a good project as well?
I think the be all and end all for the students in terms of the most important thing is just their general interest, because they're obviously doing a huge amounts of research, and ultimately the students, when you talk to the students even at the start, and you can see they are really interested in their topic, generally speaking they'll do a fantastic EPQ because they just want to they want to know more about it, they want to investigate it and write up about it. So I'd say the single most important thing is that it's something that the student is very much interested in. For me, I suppose the other things, it's a difficult one. There's such a huge range of titles that we normally get in, and I would say that we normally start with a kind of working title, and almost allow the students a little bit to maybe do a month of sort of getting involved in the project and researching, and in 90% of the cases they end up sort of slightly tweaking or changing their questions. So I suppose that's linked really to the interest, so that if they're interested in it, they're going to enjoy it. But what they actually find is when they start doing their initial research and findings and things, actually it often takes them off in different directions, and so they end up getting even more of an interest or an equal interest in other areas. And I suppose it's kind of after that month reviewing where they are and actually thinking, about the wording of the question and exactly what they want to study. So that would be general. I think it's obviously something that they've got to be able to get the teeth into, that, you know, that the answer's not there right in front of you. It's got to, for me, it's got to be a discussion. I talk to them sometimes about definitely having two sides to the arguments. I think that from a student's point of view, they find it easier to research if it's very much, you know, two different sides to an argument. We get a few historical ones, really, sort of that students kind of enjoy. The history students, even though the kind of, obviously the history students, they'll often do recent history stuff and find that they like their research to be relevant and up to date. So, you know, so I've got students at the moment, quite a few, doing things like around the Brexit situation, around Donald Trump's presidency, things like that, as opposed to sort of, you know, First World War, Second World War things, purely, and when I've asked them, it's purely because they say that they like the fact that it's a bit more of a moving environment, as opposed to, you know, obviously the facts and figures from long time ago history is less so. In terms of subject content, we get a lot. We've got very strong departments at school in terms of social sciences, so criminology, certainly law, sociology, psychology. So we get a lot of things around that area, a lot of titles around that area particularly. Other ones that we get quite a lot of tend to be around social media stuff and things like that. But every year we get massive ranges. You know, again, we've got lots of science ones. We've got all sorts of things. I've got one at the moment, a student that's really interested in music, and she's looking at all kinds of different factors. I have another one that is of an Irish heritage, and she's really keen to look at the troubles in Ireland and the, you know, the fundamentals of all that. And so, yeah, all of those things, and that last one is obviously a sort of, it's just that personal interest. It's the really, if they're really keen and enjoy the subject, in terms of the content, they'll generally do a fantastic EPQ.
I think we both definitely agree with you on that, Mark, that for any research project, from an EPQ right the way through your undergraduate degree, master's, PhD, the more successful a project will be is the more is based around how passionate the person researching it really is. And I think that's crucial to the EPQ by itself. Just one more question before we set you free for today. And that's just, from your own EPQ journey, do you have any moments that when you think back make you smile or really feel like you've had an impact, and would you share one of them with us today?
I think I've had quite a lot. I think I often sit, particularly when they're doing the presentations, and I will say the vast majority of students, I sit there like almost like a proud dad, really, when I can't believe some of the things that they're able to talk about and articulate, and the knowledge that they end up having on their questions. So I think, as a general, it's kind of all, you know, all of them from the presentation. But I've also had, I suppose the one that stands out was a young man that he's your classic, I suppose, EPQ student, in that he wanted to study medicine actually, and was very academic. When he actually went and did his interview, university interview, he came back the following days absolutely proud of himself, and just he knew that the interview had gone hugely well, because basically a number of the questions were around the topic of his EPQ, which related to the medical area and the sort of future of the medical area. And he was just absolutely buzzing from being able to show off his knowledge in that area. And you know, he ended up, he's gone on to study medicine, and I'm sure he'll be doing very well. So I suppose that one stands out as an individual, but genuinely, virtually every presentation I've watched, I've just been amazed at how articulate and how incredible the students have been in terms of their questions.
Yeah, that was really nice to hear, actually. It was lovely to hear that story. And I think Sarah and I, when we talk to teachers and practitioners about these experiences of the EPQ, we love hearing those stories of students who get the benefits of that EPQ as well. And I think you mentioned there, didn't you, about the medicine student. I think that's a really good example to give someone that, has really used the benefits of that qualification. But yeah, just before we finish, I think it's nice just with all students, isn't it? Because I think even those ones that are not maybe the highest academically achieving ones can still find some benefit from this qualification.
Yeah, I mean, I use that one because it was one that jumped out. But what I found with EPQ students is, and some I've taught. I'm a computer science teacher, and I've taught students computer science and EPQ. And I've been amazed how even the computer science students, they might not be as engaged sometimes in a computer science lesson, but yet in EPQ they will just talk to you about their subjects, and that accounts for all of them. I find that students it's a different way of teaching. There's not the sort of pressure from the teacher delivering and all that. Students just talk to you about the subject. They want your sort of input. They ask for feedback all of the time on the stuff that they've done, and that's because they are just interested and they want to make it better. So it is a different. I love teaching EPQ. I absolutely love the lessons. I love the communications I get with the students, both face to face and via email. They'll email you, all the time, just saying, "I've done this. Do you think this makes sense, or what's your views on that?" And it's suddenly a real sense of the students just buying into what you're doing, and as I say, even those students that sometimes are not the most engaged in the lessons, they end up a number of them have ended up being amazing students on EPQ.
So we hope you enjoyed hearing from Mark from Garth Academy. We're now lucky enough to be joined by Heather from Beckford School. So I'm just going to pass over to Heather to introduce herself before we start the questions.
So hi guys, I'm Heather Roberts. I work at Beckford School. I'm one of the sixth form team, so I'm a sixth form tutor. I also deliver EPQ, have done for about, I think it's 4 years now. And I'm also involved in the Duke of Edinburgh programme as coordinator of that too.
Hi Heather, thanks so much for joining us today. So my first question for you is just really easy. How did you get involved with the EPQ, and how many students do you usually have in your EPQ programme?
Okay, so my involvement started when students in my tutor group wanted to do the EPQ, and we didn't at that time have a coordinator, so they weren't sure how they could get involved. So I offered to be the coordinator, which I did for that cohort and the next, just without much support from school, to be fair, but support in terms of, yeah, fantastic, you can run it, but and in terms of actually I say that and I'm absolutely wrong, I got lots of help from other teachers who'd run EPQ in previous schools, but at this school we hadn't run it with a vengeance sort of thing, so it was fairly new to us. We had, in that first year, there were just 3 students, I think, who wanted to do it. And then since then, we've had roughly between 8 and 12 who have completed, partly because of current lockdown situations. We had about 40 enrolled in the first year of lockdown. And then over the last sort of 12 months, things have changed somewhat, haven't they? And pressures on young people have been such that EPQ has been just a little bit too much, as well as A-levels sort of on a remote learning type basis as well.
How have you found delivering the EPQ during the pandemic? Are there any positives you've taken away from it, as well as some potential challenges that you've had as well?
I think it's been mostly challenged, to be honest, because the students have been so challenged in terms of receiving lessons online from A-level lessons. In the first lockdown, that happened from March last year, so we were pretty much through all of the skills, thankfully, and they were pretty much starting on their writing up, so it didn't affect us too much, and we got some really good results. But then the only people who continued with it were the really high achieving students anyway. Students who might have been targeted C's, B's decided it was just too much and they were going to focus on their A levels. I can't really think of, apart from the introduction of the platform of Teams delivery and actually, you know, keeping a programme of education and delivery of the skills programme going, I do think it's much better in the classroom. I think you get much better interaction with the students, and they seem to be much more forthcoming if they're in front of you rather than on a screen, in my experience of EPQ anyway.
So Heather, in terms of the structure of the EPQ in your school, how do you manage it? Is it optional, or do you have to apply for it? Do you have timetabled EPQ classes, or is it done in, you know, revision and free periods? How do you kind of plan that into a timetable to suit the students and the other levels that they might be taking?
It's currently a purely optional qualification. We launched it, we tried to launch it in around the February time of year 12. This is the sort of ideal model that we have at school. We launched in February in year 12 with a view to them completing it by the November, but we don't put them in for November entry. Unfortunately, we haven't got any timetable slots, so far it's changed every single year. Sometimes I manage to find an hour that suits most of the students on timetable. Sometimes it's run as an after school session for the skills tuition. Sometimes it's a tutor time and a break time which is taken, which is about a 40-minute period of time once a week to deliver the programme. I have asked about it being a timetabled slot, but because it's an optional qualification, it's been too difficult at the moment to actually timetable it. So it is still run on a purely voluntary basis, optional for the students and voluntary from my point of view as well. So it is quite a demanding programme in that respect.
And that's a really interesting point, Heather, in terms of that you do this voluntarily alongside your other commitments within the role as well. I'm sure that there'll be some new practitioners listening to this that may also be wondering how they fit it alongside their own timetable, and also how they manage that alongside other responsibilities as well. How do you do that currently? Have you got any top tips for that as well?
Just being extremely organised, many weeks in advance really. The programme that I put to the students is timetabled. I know exactly what I'm doing at any one week. So if I do have to miss, or if they have to miss, then I know exactly where I am in the programme. Trying to get time dedicated from school is difficult unless it's a school where it is it's not optional. You know, if it's something that the students have to do, then it is timetabled, of course. But if it's something which is optional, then I think a lot of schools may find the same difficulties, where staff and students are having to find time outside of their standard timetable in order to either deliver the skills programme or to attend the skills programme. So it is quite challenging for students. It is certainly, you know, an extra qualification that they are well aware of. They're certainly earning it.
It sounds from the time commitments and the fact that you do sort of volunteer your time and have to be so well organised with this, that you care a lot about the EPQ and the impact that it can have on young people's futures. How do you kind of show that in the process of engaging your students with the project and getting them involved in the qualification? Do you run assemblies, or do you have, you know, meetings with groups of students who are interested? How do you kind of get that buy-in?
I'd say the most common thing that I've done most years now is an assembly, and that this year has been a remote assembly. Last year it was a live assembly, and it's a 20-minute introduction to the whole concept of what EPQ is about. Some of the students know about it, most of them don't really know about it. They've heard of it, but that's it. They've not thought about researching any deeper into what EPQ even stands for. So I tried to launch it on an equal basis, you know, completely equal opportunity for anybody who wishes to know about it in assembly. And then I run the very first skills session, if you like, is an information session with no commitments on either part. And the first sort of 3 or 4 sessions that I run are commitment free. So we use Project Q to support the students, but I don't get them logged onto it straight away until I think they are a little bit more serious, because some students, if they're signing up because they think it's a good idea, or their mates are doing it, or they want it as a tick box exercise for a university course, sometimes they're not as committed as they might be. So I don't get them signed up straight away onto Project Q. I'll leave it a couple of weeks and we go through a few skills things, and they can have a really good think about, is it for them? Have they got the time? A lot of students, as you all know, are really busy with extracurricular activities themselves and pulling in another, effectively half an A-level on top of what is already a busy academic schedule, and a busy either sports or extracurricular schedule is just too much. So I sort of have that first month, if you like, as a real fact-finding and tester type thing, and that seems to work quite well.
And this will be the final question from me. So when we look at the actual qualification itself, what makes a good EPQ? When you look at some of the student examples, is there anything in common that you find that really makes a generally really interesting EPQ, but also what are you looking out for in terms of top tips for students in terms of getting the best out of the qualification as well?
I think the very best I've ever seen are from those students who, when they talk about the EPQ, they're talking about a topic that they just absolutely love, and they usually want to go into at university. It really, they talk about the EPQ and their eyes light up, their body engages in the presentation. You almost can't stop them talking about it because they want to share everything they've learnt about it. They can't wait sometimes to investigate certain elements of it that they've had to really stop themselves in the research because it's so interesting for them that they just want to continue, and they're the ones who produce such interesting EPQs, and they're the ones where they continue asking questions of themselves and of their research. And whatever subject it is, it doesn't matter. We've had astrophysics through, theoretical physics through, absolutely everything. But their passion really, I hate the word passion sometimes, it gets so overused in education, but their absolute love and passion for their subject is something that makes any subject interesting. And you can see that their own research is just, they're having to stop themselves because it's taking them too long, and they could produce a 50,000 words report, never mind a 5,000 word report. So they're the ones that really are successful, the ones that are so interested in the topic.
It is really interesting, and it is, for lack of a better word, passion, but it is that it's so fantastic to meet young people that have that real drive and engagement in something that they care about. And it's one of our favorite things when we work with young people and we talk to them about their topics, and you could see where that would maybe go from an EPQ to an undergraduate to a master's and then to a PhD. You know, you can kind of almost view their potential career trajectory in front of them. I'm just going to ask one last question before we finish today, and that's, what do you enjoy most about the EPQ? What's your favorite thing about it? Do you have any moments over the years where you've thought, yeah, this is a great qualification, I'm glad that I got involved with this?
I think any opportunity to see a student thrive and do something they love doing, I think you know, you wouldn't be in the job if you didn't really enjoy that. It's absolutely fascinating to see somebody come alive in their subjects, and some of the subjects are so out of my reach. You know, deep level biology and chemistry. They leave me standing by the door in in the depth of their understanding and in their absolute passion for that subject. And seeing that really come alive is a gift, really. It's an absolute gift to be in the same room when they're doing the presentation and they want to share what they found out about this subject. You know, I feel sometimes I should be paying them as a member of an audience in a presentation or a show or something that, you know, they've given me 20 minutes, half an hour of their time. And I really should be paying them for it, because it's just such a professional level of delivery that they've given. And the work that they've put into it, the hours and hours and hours of work that they've put into them to get to the point where they can confidently stand in front of you and deliver the results of their findings. It's an absolute gift.
So we hoped you enjoyed hearing from Heather, and we're now joined by Alastair from the University Technical College in Leeds. I'm going to ask Alastair to introduce himself, and then we'll ask him a few more questions. So Alastair, tell us a little bit about where you work and your involvement with the EPQ.
Hi Sarah, thank you. So I'm Alastair Chambers. I'm currently at UTC Leeds. I've been teaching here for a couple of years. I'm a geography teacher, but I'm also responsible for what we call the values curriculum here, which covers things like SMSC, RSHE, citizenship, and I've recently become the EPQ coordinator as well.
Thanks for joining us today, Alastair. I'm going to kick off the first couple of questions for you. And first of all, I'm just going to ask, how did you get involved with the EPQ? How long have you been delivering it for? Just kind of give a bit of a context to your involvement with the EPQ so far.
Yeah, no problem. So I've become the coordinator as of January of 2021. It's come about because of the departure of a colleague. So I've had to hit the ground running, really. I didn't have any prior knowledge or understanding of what the EPQ was. I've had to start from scratch, really. I've had to go about doing the training offered by AQA. I've got some colleagues here who have taught it to some extent in the past, but largely it's been learning from a very, very low base level in terms of what I knew about EPQ. And since taking on EPQ, I've got to the point now where some of my students have submitted work this time. I've gone through the assessment process with them, and whilst there is still a fair bit that I'm a little bit unsure about, I do feel like I've got an understanding of what the EPQ is all about now, and I've got a lot of ideas about where I'm going to take it next year.
So just going from that, Alastair, how did you find the process of settling into the EPQ and the structure of it in your school? Is it optional for all the students, or do they apply for it? Is it something that's timetabled and on your timetable, or have you got to fit it in around other commitments and the students have to fit it in around their other commitments? How do you kind of manage it, and do you think you'll make any changes if you're allowed?
So last year, and for the current year 12 group, it's been taught as something that we call a society here. So on a Wednesday afternoon, after the end of the college day, the students are asked to stick around for another hour and a half, and they can choose what their society is going to be. Some students chose to do EPQ in their society's time. It hasn't been, in my opinion, the best way of delivering it, because it's meant that for some students, they haven't really regarded it in the same light as they see their other timetabled subjects. Now, luckily, from September 2021, the students that are at year 12 going into year 13, they will now see EPQ in their timetable. So from now until November, when we're hoping to complete the current year 12 work, they will have EPQ timetabled in for 3 lots of 50 minutes. And for those students that are electing to do EPQ in the new year 12, they will also have 3 50-minute sessions. And it's being offered at our college as an option. Some of our students do single engineering, and others do double engineering. Those ones that do single engineering have got some space within their timetables where there is the option to do EPQ, and that's how and why students would choose it. And actually, what that's meant is the take up of EPQ in September is looking like it'll be around about 30 students, whereas currently it's about 13.
How have you found delivering the EPQ, especially being so new to the qualification and during a pandemic as well? Are there any positives that you've taken away from this particular year? Anything that you've learned from it that, you know, for the next kind of group of students doing the EPQ, you can do something differently potentially with as well?
Yeah, there have been lots of challenges, and there have been loads of positive takeaways actually. So in terms of the challenges, well, as I mentioned, I've come at this from a really low starting point in terms of my own knowledge of it. It's been a lot of learning on my part. What I've realised is that the previous EPQ coordinator perhaps didn't put enough emphasis on the need for research before defining the question that's going to be answered. And so some of the students that have done EPQ already, they've started by coming up with a question which they haven't really determined whether they can find sufficient sources of information to actually answer. They've then tried to retrospectively do the research, and some of them have found that difficult, as you'd expect. What I've also learned is that actually some of the students who really had little or no guidance for a big part of their EPQ have just been able to go about finding out what they needed to know to succeed at EPQ with actually you know, minimal input from teachers. So there are students who I think it's probably got even more from those students than it probably would have done had they had a more consistent delivery from the EPQ coordinator that was my predecessor. So what I've learned is that actually some students thrive on that complete independence, and I was blown away by the quality of some of the products that were submitted in May. They were outstandingly good, and that was with, as I say, little or no input from staff here.
I'm sure that was very tricky for some of the students to kind of especially manage in a pandemic and undertake such a big project, which we know the EPQ is. How have you managed to engage your new students and get them involved with the qualification? Do you do an assembly? Do you do a couple of talks? How do you kind of get that buy-in from students before starting the project?
Yeah, that's actually a really pertinent question at the moment, because we were due to have a transition day earlier this week, which clearly has had to be cancelled. So what that's meant is that I now need to find ways of reaching out to the students who I would like to be recruiting. I've got to find a way of doing that, and it'll likely be done over Google Classrooms, because all of the students that will be joining us in September have been invited to become part of a Google Classroom. We're calling it our bridging sessions, where all of the subject specialists here are delivering step-up lessons from year 11 up to year 12, and people like myself are able to put out, I guess you could call it, promotional material onto the Google Classrooms to try and get students interested in our subjects, whether that's, you know, geography A level or EPQ. So that's what we're going to have to do, and I'm having to just adapt my plans a little bit at the moment. But in terms of promoting EPQ day to day, we're quite lucky because our college is small. We've got about 500 students on roll in September, we're expecting. And what that means is that actually it's easy for people like me to get about and to speak to our students and just to raise the profile of EPQ in quite an informal way. And also we're lucky that our year 12s and year 13s mix quite a lot under normal circumstances. They talk to each other quite a lot. And I think word gets around like that as well. So that kind of does our job for us to some extent, but I do need to make sure that I'm doing it in a formal way also.
You've mentioned, Alastair, about the importance of doing research for the EPQ, of the students to really kind of make sure that they know that topic to that level by doing really kind of intensive research before picking a topic. Have you got any kind of top tips that you give to students, or anything that you particularly notice what makes a really good EPQ?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say that you guys at the University of Leeds have massively helped me and my students to see how to do the research. The workshops that you guys have delivered to my students were invaluable, and seeing PhD students and hearing from PhD students whose main purpose at the moment is research. It's helped our students to understand what good quality research looks like. But in terms of top tips for people that might be beginning EPQ at their school or college, I would say just emphasize the needs to start with an area of interest. I've been asking my students to think about recent developments within that area of interest. Something that was said by one of the people that delivered on behalf of the University of Leeds was always attempt to narrow it down by time periods, by place, by group of people that you're referring to. So the narrower the focus, the better the chance of actually undertaking good quality research that will ultimately result in the answering of the research question, whatever that may be.
That's really kind of you to say. Thank you so much. We've really enjoyed working with your students as well, and I do remember that particular workshop where we talked about research topics and how to really narrow them down, and it is what it comes down to, is an enthusiasm for the subject, and that's the driving force I find behind a lot of students and their EPQ. Something I noticed with the EPQ is that most schools tend to drift towards the dissertation element and avoid the artifact. Would you say that you get an even mix? Is the artifact a popular option in your school, or do you kind of sway more towards the dissertation option too?
Yeah, so with us being an engineering college, of the students that completed in May, 50% did artifacts. Now that's 50% of a small cohort, and so when I think about the students that are in year 12 going into year 13 currently, there are some students that are hoping to do an artifact, but I would say it's far less than 50%. But we are looking that we've got the facilities here to make artifacts a feasible route to take. We're looking that we've got specialist equipment in our workshop. We've got colleagues who are able to offer direction in terms of how to use that specialist equipment that perhaps in some other schools and colleges people might not have. But in terms of me coordinating that, one thing that I've noticed is that the AQA training that I've attended has largely focused on the dissertation and not so much on the artifact. So when my students submitted artifacts, to some extent I found that more daunting when it came to the assessment of those, because the moderation material that I'd seen as part of the AQA training didn't really extend to talking about the artifacts, and so it was more I'm not going to say guesswork, but it was less founded on me being able to compare my students' work with the exemplars that I'd seen from AQA.
And your final question, Alastair, today is, what's been your most enjoyable thing about the EPQ, and what do you enjoy about delivering the EPQ? Well,
so far, the best thing by a mile was watching the presentations that the students who completed in May delivered. And again, I'll say again that those students had long periods of time where they weren't getting any kind of direction from colleagues here. They were working independently at home. They were remote learning, but also there was an absence of direction for them at times as well. They produced their products, whether that was an artifact or a written piece. They submitted that, and they were good. Don't get me wrong. The products that they submitted were really good, but it was the presentations that absolutely stunned me. And I had, in each of the presentations, I had a different colleague in there some of them delivered in person, some delivered remotely. But to a person, those students that gave the presentations absolutely gave just fantastic accounts of themselves, and it goes back to the idea of the research that you were asking before, that all of them made themselves experts. They made themselves experts in things which I had absolutely zero idea about prior to them talking to me about them. They came across as people who if you were looking to employ someone that had a specialism in the areas that they'd investigated, you'd snap them up, because they were just absolutely brimming over with enthusiasm and knowledge and just care for the stuff that they were talking about. So that was the thing that I've enjoyed most, and I'm hoping that the current year 12s into year 13s are able to step up and do just as well on theirs when the time comes as well.
We really like asking that question, Alastair, and it's been really interesting actually asking that question to the teachers that have taken part in episode 2 of the podcast, and a lot of them have kind of mentioned how enjoyable listening to the students are, and the presentation as well is. So it's really pleasing to hear that, and it's something that definitely Sarah and I also really love to see as well, as part of it, especially just the students' enthusiasm. So yeah, that's the end of today's podcast. So first of all, thank you, Alastair, for joining Sarah and I today and giving your kind of experience and sharing it about your students at UTC. So that is the end of this podcast here. So I want to thank you for listening today. And it's something that we have done in collaboration with Southampton. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please check out the other podcasts we've created in this EPQ podcast series. Thank you for listening today.